My brother, who spent years tormenting me, was cut off by our parents after I revealed that he had slept with my wife and might be the father of my son. Mom would prepare his food, wash his clothes, and even ask me to help with his homework. Since he's family, I was expected to lend a hand, but I never received the same courtesy back. I learned to live with it since I was self-sufficient. Maybe I should take some of the blame for meeting his needs and wants without expecting the same in return. He only ever reached out to me when he needed something from me. He never learned to give when I needed it. He was just like our dad. I was a shy, introverted child who loved to study and be by myself. Harsh and boisterous, I also liked to be direct and honest. I don't like to mince words and tell it like it is. I think my upbringing may have contributed to my mother's unfavorable opinion of me. He became our family's favorite as a result. That didn't bother me when we were younger. The problem started when he discovered a means to mock or intimidate me for not being like him. I wore spectacles, so he would make fun of me for that. He would try to break into my room and read my diary so he could tell my mother about everything I wrote. I used to scream at him and tell my parents that he was violating my personal space. However, they would brush it off with a laugh and tell me it wasn't a big deal. He committed more horrible crimes, such as almost shattering my glasses and contaminating my food. He even once accidentally dropped tiny stones into my cereal, but fortunately, I discovered them before they could have damaged my teeth. When I told my mother, she dismissed it, saying that brothers bond in this way. Each time we would argue, Caleb would purposefully offend me by highlighting all of my flaws. He knew that I was being bullied by a few kids because we attended the same school, so he would stand by those kids rather than by my side. In his opinion, I was just a huge failure. He would join them in calling me names like the hairy monkey or the ugly loser and incite the bullies to hurt me physically. We got into a fight once more over something I can't recall, but it was probably something stupid. He told me to commit suicide. When the fight was over, insults I could laugh off with ease, but at the time I was having mental health issues, so that one hurt a lot. Now I'm doing better. The news that my own brother wished for my death was devastating. Mom did not seem to care that Dad was away from home a lot for work. She even gave me a reprimand once, saying I should have known better than to play and annoy him. Things continued to deteriorate when we were in high school. He tried to burn my hair once, and surprisingly, Mom supported him, saying he was only kidding. Who plays like that, really? Thankfully, came around to my way of thinking and acknowledged that they were having some major problems. He threatened to call the police on Caleb. This was an eye-opening moment for my brother because, until then, he had never been reprimanded for any of his actions. He was really taken aback, and my dad continued to tell him how enough was enough and that he needed to start respecting his older brother. Later, Dad came into my room and talked to me. I had never expected my dad to support me because he always told Caleb while he was growing up how similar both of them were, which was true. Dad told me that he had patiently waited for years for Caleb to grow up, thinking maybe he was just being an immature kid, but he was slowly starting to realize that Caleb was becoming a big bully. When I heard my dad say this, I felt so validated that I almost broke down in tears. I confessed to my dad everything that Caleb had done to me over the years, and even opened up about the bullying in school. My dad was shocked that I was going through so much. The next day, he went and talked to the principal so my bullies could be warned about severe consequences if they continued. Later in the evening, my dad enrolled me in mixed martial arts at our local gym and told me that I needed to man up and stand up to bullies in my life. I will admit that a nerdy kid like me trying to learn to fight must have been laughable to watch. However, like everything in my life, I am very focused when I want to learn something. I carved out time from my studies so I could work out every day and go to the mixed martial arts classes. Not to brag, but it completely changed my life and my physique. One day, Caleb was at it again. He had stolen my pocket money, which he used to get if we helped our parents with doing chores. I had been saving my money for quite some time. Caleb had sneaked into my room and taken my money. I caught him when he was about to cycle off with his friends. I firmly told him to give me back my money since he knew stealing was wrong. But Caleb snickered and taunted that all I could do was run to Daddy for help. I don't know what came over me, but I gave Caleb a resounding punch to his face. He was stunned into silence as he fell backward on the ground. I picked him up, took out my money from his trouser pocket, and then threw him back down on the ground. Caleb started to cry loudly like a little baby. It was comical to see a teenage boy crying on the ground. However, my mother came running out the door, hearing her baby boy crying, to help him up and find out what had happened. When she learned that I had fought with him, she was surprised and then started to reprimand me. She told me that as an older brother, I should teach better things to Caleb. While Caleb seemed to be enjoying seeing me being chastised, my mother also complained to my dad about how I had thrashed Caleb up and how I needed to be controlled. My dad grimly asked both of us to explain ourselves. I told him how Caleb had stolen the money that I worked hard for and saved up while Caleb attempted to justify how he needed the money for a date. They asked my brother if I should help him. However, Dad told Caleb that he was lucky I just punched him for stealing my money because anyone else would have called the police on him. My dad continued to tell Caleb how he had no right to take others' things without their consent. Caleb didn't like that and started to throw a tantrum, probably wanting our mother to side with him, but Dad remained firm. When Caleb realized that I was not going to be punished for punching him, he screamed how much he hated me and then ran back into his room and locked himself in. Since that incident, Caleb maintained his distance from me. He had finally realized that he could not bully me anymore, and even Dad was not supporting his antics. For the first time in a long time, I felt we were equals. Even though he could not physically hurt me, he would try to verbally say nasty things to me when he knew our parents would not be around. It definitely got worse as he got older. It felt like each year he became angrier and had a shorter fuse. If I approached him to ask something, he would simply ignore me to my face and walk away out of the room, calling me a nerd or a loser under his breath. If he wanted to say something to me, he would only go through our mother, who would relay the message. I would question my mother as to why Caleb could not just talk to me if he wanted something, and she would implore me to be more understanding. I had no clue if this was just him going through puberty and I had to wait it out, or if he actually truly hated me. I used to be able to deal with the things he would say over the years, but it got to a point where I just wanted to move out of home to get away from him. I would go to my mother countless times asking if she could mediate a sit-down conversation for all of us to talk it out, but she always refused, saying she didn't want to get involved. I even asked for her opinion on why he treated me that way, but she would just brush off the question. Eventually, I went away to my dream university. Since I was a great student and was even qualified for a scholarship, my dad threw a party for me, and my mom seemed proud of me also. However, Caleb remained aloof and distant, barely acknowledging my achievements. The day I left for university was a mix of excitement for the future and relief to escape the toxic environment at home. The first few months at university were liberating. I made new friends, enjoyed my classes, and started to build a life separate from the oppressive atmosphere I had experienced growing up. The constant fear of Caleb's verbal attacks lifted, and I felt a newfound sense of peace. I began dating my wife, Karen, when we were both in the second year of university. My friend introduced us at a frat party, and we clicked right away. Coming from a religious family, having kids without being married was a big no-no. However, we found out she was pregnant when we were in the last year of university, which prompted us to get married as soon as we graduated. Our wedding was a small but peaceful ceremony. Our parents were happy for us, and we had a good time at our wedding. At that moment, I believed she was the love of my life. I always held the mindset that I wanted monogamy in life, one woman to come home to and be with for the long haul. Despite women trying to engage with me over the years, I never pursued anything because I was genuinely content in my marriage. Karen was my dream girl, and I never wanted to hurt her. However, over the years, there were 2 occasions when I discovered she was being unfaithful in our marriage. One was an off-and-on affair that lasted a few years with her married coworker, and the other was a fling with an ex she had dated in high school when she went to visit her family states away. I'm sure there will be people who might call me foolish, and looking back, I can't really deny it myself. After a period of separation in both situations, I made the decision to forgive my wife. I never wanted to raise my child in a broken home, and I genuinely believed we could overcome these challenges. We were quite young when the situation with her coworker occurred, so I chalked it up to youthful mistakes and not thinking things through. For a while, things seemed okay with us. I could never fully trust her, but I tried my best to push aside my doubts because I knew that if I chose to forgive her, I had to work towards moving past it and starting with a clean slate. It's been 4 years since the second time she was unfaithful, and I felt like I made the right decision by giving her a chance to show that she still wanted to be in our marriage. For years, Karen seemed to have changed, and we were genuinely happy with plans set in motion for the future of our family. However, 3 months ago, my reality was once again shattered by yet another incident, which in my mind was far worse than the others. When she revealed that she had been sleeping with someone for quite some time and suggested that our son might not even be mine, hearing her words felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. A mix of shock, betrayal, and disbelief overwhelmed me. I struggled to comprehend the enormity of what she had just disclosed. In a daze, I managed to ask her why she had kept such a significant secret and how she could have done something so devastating. Her reaction was a cold and indifferent demeanor. She seemed detached, almost unbothered by the pain she had inflicted. Her responses were vague, leaving me with more questions than answers. It was a surreal and painful moment, confronting the shattered trust and the uncertainties about my own family. I continued to ask Karen to tell me the truth because I felt like I deserved to know the father of the child, since I had been literally raising our son since the beginning. In the end, she admitted that it was Caleb. My eyes widened in shock as I asked her what exactly she meant by that. This is when Karen told me how she and Caleb had become friends back when I had introduced Karen to my family, and she had stayed with us for Thanksgiving up until New Year's. I remember Caleb, who was usually cold to me, being quite polite and warm towards her. I was glad, since I did not want to make Karen feel unwelcome. She wanted to be accepted into my family, so she would spend significant time hanging out with my mom whenever she could. She noticed that Caleb and I were not that close and questioned me about it. I finally opened up to her about my childhood relationship with Caleb and told her how we might never be able to repair our relationship since he never could move past his feelings. Karen understood. However, she started to include Caleb whenever we would go out, perhaps hoping that both of us would warm up to each other. If we were going to watch a movie, she would invite Caleb, and then we would have to watch whatever movie Caleb wanted to watch. I guess during this time Caleb and I did talk a few words here and there, which was a significant improvement compared to how he had been giving me the silent treatment for years. I do remember Karen and Caleb would hang out and play video games together, but I never thought much about it. Karen told me how one day Caleb opened up to her about his struggles and his recent breakup with his then ex-girlfriend. He seemed so vulnerable with her, and they struck a friendship. She said how he would sometimes harmlessly flirt with her when I was not around, and apparently one thing led to another, and she could not control herself anymore. I closed my eyes as the vision of my wife and brother sleeping together almost made me puke. She told me how guilty she felt after that and ran away from him. After that, she decided to go back home, which was true because my girlfriend had abruptly told me how she wanted to go back home when I thought she would be spending New Year's with me. I tried to convince her to stay, but she was adamant that she had to go. After the holidays, when we met in college once our classes resumed, she was back to her usual cheerful self, so I never questioned anything. 2 weeks after that, we found out that she was pregnant. Now Karen told me that she had no idea whether it was really my child or Caleb's, and she had no way to find proof because I was already stepping up. She knew out of the two, I was a more dependable brother, so she decided to stay with me. This is why we got married. I felt like my whole world was crashing down around me. The son I had loved and spent countless hours with might not even be mine. I questioned her if she had been sleeping with Caleb in the present times, and she nodded slowly. She told me how she and Caleb had always stayed in touch because their chemistry was undeniable. They would sneak off to hotels when she would lie to me that she was working overtime. She told me how half of her business trips were just romantic getaways with him. I asked how and why she would even be married to me if she really wanted my brother, but Karen told me how she did not want to be the one to break off a marriage, and seeing how I was such a wonderful father to our son, she had stayed with me all this while. In her words, she had made a mistake and didn't know when to stop. I simply told Karen that I was glad she told me the truth and that I was going to pack up and move out. Karen started to cry and asked for my forgiveness, telling me how I was supposed to scream and yell at her, but here I was, calmly thinking of my next move. I remained quiet while I walked to my cupboard and started packing some of my clothes into my suitcase. Karen kept saying how if I really loved her, then I should try to at least fight for her and that mistakes happen in every marriage. When she realized that I was not going to do anything, she changed her tactic and told me how my son would be affected if we got a divorce and how children should not be brought up in a broken home. I reminded her how I might not even be the father, which then reduced her to tears, and she started to yell at me about being cruel and how I could easily walk away when I had been there for the child since his birth. It seemed like my wife believed there was nothing that could make me want out of our marriage. I guess it was partly my fault for letting a lot slide in the past. While I did have some love for her, it felt more like it originated from the fact that I assumed we had a son together and had been together since college. Karen continued to say that it was not too late and that we could work things out, but I struggled to believe it and felt like I had no more patience to deal with her. Trust was a significant issue for me. Even if I forgave her, I could never forget that she had slept with my own brother. I've always felt that people could make errors and be forgiven because we're all flawed, but this went beyond a certain extent. I left her wailing on the threshold and checked into a motel. The next day, I went straight to my parents and told them everything about my wife's affair with Caleb and how they had been sleeping together for years behind our backs. The shock on their faces was clear. My mother, true to her nature, immediately sought to defend Caleb, telling me that this could not be true since her boy would never do anything like this to his own brother. Determined to expose the truth, I urged my parents to remain silent and enable me to call Caleb right in front of them. I told them not to make a sound since this was how I could show Caleb's true colors. I wanted him to think that it was just a private talk between us so that he could maybe let his guard down. As Caleb picked up, I laid it on him and confronted him with the discovery of his affair with my wife. Initially, he disputed it passionately and refused to accept it. After I informed him that Karen had acknowledged everything, he began to accuse Karen and called her a lackluster person. He told me that since he was the more attractive sibling, it was not his fault if ladies were drawn to him. I vehemently warned him that I would reveal him to everyone. I laughed at Caleb's conceit and thanked him for verifying the truth. When he said that no one would believe me and that he was the golden child, nonetheless Caleb fell silent, realizing that our parents had heard everything. He then stumbled over his words as he tried to clear his name. Still reeling from the shock, my mother insisted that Caleb give her an explanation. He stammered through a weak attempt to defend his conduct, placing the responsibility squarely on Karen while blaming everyone else but himself. I could see that my mother, who had formerly shielded her favorite son, was now experiencing a mixture of resentment and disappointment. I experienced a peculiar sense of vindication during that intense time. I had suffered through Caleb's agony for years. The roles had now been flipped and the truth had come to light. Caleb was the one who was exposed, and his behavior was made clear to everyone. My father, who was often quiet in his expressions, became agitated as Caleb stammered through his remarks. He went off on me and wanted me to hand him the phone. He started in on Caleb, sounding quite disapproving. You have betrayed not only your brother, but also this family with what you have done. You have slept with your brother's wife before and after they were married. The faith we once placed in you has been permanently eroded by your actions, which have repercussions. You need to learn to cherish family devotion and manners from me. Everything I've tried to teach you is at odds with what you've demonstrated today. He hesitated, allowing Caleb's conscience to absorb the weight of his words. The disrespect for your brother's marriage and the indifference to his sentiments is not appropriate. You've damaged the ties that bind our family together in addition to hurting him. I believe that what you have become now is my fault and your mother's fault. Furthermore, we won't put up with this behavior any longer. I'm stopping you from receiving the college funds I set up for you. As of right now, you are responsible for calculating your own tuition costs. Additionally, I will no longer be supporting your way of life. Do you really believe that sleeping with married women makes you a better man? Now that you don't have my money to rely on, let's see what happens to you. Conversely, I remained calm and collected during the entire ordeal. I wanted to yell at Caleb at first, but the best vindication came from seeing my dad discipline him. I'd seen him for who he really was, and he had obviously misjudged the fallout. Caleb persisted in defending himself in his protests. However, my father abruptly canceled the call, putting an end to Caleb's attempts to justify his behavior. My mother approached me and gave me a hug. We hadn't experienced something like that in a long time, but in that embrace, despite the chaos in the family, there was implicit support and understanding. She expressed her regret to me for not being there the entire time. I had the impression that my 14-year-old self could never have envisioned her mother's support and validation of this moment. After that, in order to get a suitable divorce lawyer, my dad helped me select one. With Karen in an attempt to fight me dirty, she and her attorney asked for alimony, although I made more money than she did. Fortunately, her affair worked much to my advantage. My son underwent a paternity test as well, and the results showed that Caleb was the child's biological father. How difficult it was for me to process this news is beyond words. Compared to when Karen admitted to me that she had been unfaithful, this was worse. The fact that my son wasn't mine infuriated me, but I guess God works in weird ways because despite everything, I chose to remain strong. Although Karen pleaded with me to continue seeing my kid, I was unable to stand the thought of punishing him for everything. I detested the fact that he brought Caleb to mind. I was at last free when my divorce was finalized. I got a bachelor pad of my own. I had married young and had never actually lived alone, so being on my own seemed strange. I was quick to adjust to my bachelor lifestyle, though, because I had always been independent and I was honestly happy with it. My dad called me 2 weeks ago. He mentioned he was considering changing his will. Since he didn't want to give anything to Caleb, my dad was adamant about not wanting anything to do with Caleb. If there's one thing to know about him, it's that he's really obstinate. He fulfilled his promise. Caleb made an effort to get in touch with our parents and even knocked on their door to ask for forgiveness, but he was turned away. Though it must be hurting her the most, my mother, who generally gives in to Caleb's tantrums, also appears to be done with him. Caleb obviously didn't even regret what he had done because he didn't even text me to apologize for it. During the whole ordeal, all he was upset about was not being able to see our parents. That indicated to me that he would be leaving everything in my possession, only to make sure Caleb doesn't object afterward. he would be taking merely $1 from him. My dad had put in a lot of effort during his life to accumulate his assets, retirement fund, and life insurance. It would total about $2 million. His will simply stated that even though I would become the owner, my mom would remain to reside in their home if my dad died before her. Naturally, this didn't bother me because I wanted to care for my mother till the very end. I'm not sure how, but Caleb found out about everything. Because he can't get in touch with my parents, he tried to make amends with me by calling yesterday. He informed me that he had been struggling to keep up with his studies and that Karen had been bugging him about child support ever since she learned that he was the child's father. He admitted to me that he was broke and had been applying for part-time jobs but had not been successful. He was in desperate need of my assistance, so he begged me to speak with our family so we could start over. I laughed at his expression and told him I was so over him and that before he slept with my wife and got her pregnant, they should have had a fight. I agreed with Caleb's argument that I was being unfair and that she was also at fault, reminding him that I had already divorced her and that she was now his responsibility. Thus, he has no business calling me to berate her or her child. Caleb began to argue, pointing out that this was his own fault, but I interrupted him, reminding him that he was now the family's black sheep, the one who had slept with his own brother's wife rather than the family favorite. At this point, Caleb began to cry and admitted to me that, yes, our grandparents and relatives had been pissing on him. But I am worrying about this now. I told him that since I was no longer his brother, we were done and that he should never contact me again. I've been playing back the conversation in my head ever since. Despite my hatred for my brother since we grew up, at least I had never heard him cry. To be honest, it hurt me a little that he was so defenseless. Essentially, I'm here to inquire about whether or not I should bring him up with our parents. If I didn't update them, would that make me an a-hole? Hello to all of you. In addition to calling me cruel, many of you have been inquiring as to why I haven't been in contact with my son, Henry. I'm sorry to say it, but raising a child of another man doesn't feel right. This is not a case of a stepson. I was told that he was my son, and then I found out that he was actually the son of my brother. I'm hurt, of course, and I've been crying about it for days. However, the real reason I don't want to speak with Henry is that I don't want Karen in my life anymore. She'll find a way to worm her way back into my life if I speak to her child. I also require my own area. I may be callous or conceited, but I will never again be able to see him or, for a very long time at least. Update 2. As most of you guessed correctly, my mother was the one who told Caleb about my dad changing his will. As a last-ditch effort to patch things up, he called me. I did confront her in front of my dad, and she broke down. She told me how I had punished Caleb enough and that he had learned his lesson. My dad firmly told my mother that if she felt what Caleb did was forgivable, then he could no longer stay married to her since he could never forgive him for his betrayal. His threat seemed to shut my mother up. My dad made it clear to her that if she ever talked with Caleb and we found out, then she could pack her bags and leave him. Like I said, my dad is a very stubborn guy. Hopefully, my mother will learn from her mistakes. Update 3. Hi Reddit. It's been 5 months since my last update. My relationship with my parents has improved in the last couple of months. My dad and I go golfing every weekend, and he behaves with me more like a buddy than my own father. My mother, even though she misses Caleb, has stayed away from him. The last I heard about Caleb was from my cousin, who told me how Caleb had been asking everyone for money and, in the end, had to drop out of college when he could not afford to pay his fees anymore. He and Karen are living together, and he even has a job as a part-time mechanic. Apparently, they are raising Henry together, which is a good thing, I guess. I never bring up Caleb in my discussions with my parents, and neither do they. For everyone asking, I am doing quite well. I was promoted at my job 2 months ago, so my salary has improved significantly. I haven't been dating anyone since I feel like I need time and space to heal. I have been going for a few therapy classes, so I guess we will see how that works out.